First, I have a question for you. Imagine yourself being a burglar and wanting to enter a house. Do you think it will be easier to enter the house you can see here on the left? Or do you think it is easier to enter the house you can see here on the right? How many of you think it's easier to enter the house on the left? And how many of you think it's easier to burgle the house on the right? Well, I have good news. You're both right, because it depends on your method. When you want to enter the house on the left and you're willing to demolish something, then it's probably easier to enter the house on the left. But when you want to steal something and get some treasures inside and prefer to open doors and windows that shouldn't be available or open, then it's probably easier to enter the house on the right because it simply has more entry points. So you may wonder, what does this have to do with the cyber resiliency of our energy system? And the answer is an awful lot. Because we know in the Task Force for Digitalization in Energy that our energy system as we used to know it was more like the house on the left. It consisted of just a few producers, and it was a simple system that brought energy to a house or another consumer. But today, because we have to deal with many more producers, like windmills, solar parks, solar panels on consumers' houses, the smart integrated energy system has become way more complex. And because it's more complex, we need digitalization to make it work. And as Sylvain already mentioned, using digitalization has many advantages because we can, for example, gather a lot of data, and we use this data to make better predictions and better decisions. To, for example, balance the load for recharging vehicles, as we will look at this afternoon. And as he also already mentioned, is that although this has many advantages, it also brings challenges. And one of these challenges are these cybersecurity issues. And we just noticed that an outage can happen suddenly, unannounced, and that is because this smart integrated energy system has many more entry points than the energy system in the past. Like this small house we saw earlier had only one door, whereas this big house had many doors and windows. And also, because of that, our current energy system, we can attack it in many more different ways. So more types of attacks are possible. So for example, entry points we can see in today's energy system are, for example, servers. And servers are computers that are made available to other computers to provide a certain service, which means that they need to be able to communicate with each other, which means as well that certain so-called ports need to be open on a server. And a port, you can compare it to a door in a house. Because if there's no door available, no one can knock on the door and say, hey, can I please use your service? So doors need to be available, but if more doors are open or available than should be available, then attackers have more ways to attack this server and possibly enter the energy system. Also, this more complex energy system allows the network to be attacked because all these different digital components need to, of course, communicate with each other, for example, to transfer data. And attackers can, for example, perform a traffic analysis, which means that they look at what data is sent back and forth, how often, and which components are communicating with each other, which you can, for example, compare with a burglar looking at someone's house and see when the owners are coming in and out and how long they stay out. And this helps to plan future attacks and make it more likely that these attacks are successful. Other entry points are, for example, humans who operate all these digital solutions. And humans are often a great way to attack because we like to be nice. We like to keep doors open for others so that they come in with us. Which could be like talking to a neighbor to find out where the neighbor hid their secret key. And as I said, also more different type of attacks are possible. So in the past, mostly physical attacks were possible. For example, cutting cables or demolishing a certain part of the energy system. But today, attackers can also have fun with software. For example, when there is a computer program that is responsible for controlling parts of the energy system, this software can be attacked. Also, the network can be attacked. For example, when data is sent through a Wi-Fi connection, then this connection can be looked at or can be the information can be guarded by attackers so that they can use this to find sensitive information, for example. And encryption attacks are possible, which means that when data is encrypted, so only readable for the sender and receiver, attackers can try to crack the code and try to read the originally encrypted message. So while using digitalization has huge advantages of making sure that all the different components work together, these challenges need to be taken into account as well and be addressed so that the outage, like just happened, is only a few seconds and not days in a row, for example. And we in the Task Force for Digitalization in Energy propose a combined top-down and bottom-up approach to achieve this. And top-down means that on a management level, regulations and standards are put in place that inform the workforce how to implement security on a technical level. And at the same time, the workforce at the technical level informs the management on how these standards and regulations can be improved based on identified technical issues. And this top-down and bottom-up, combined top-down and bottom-up approach helps us prevent cybersecurity attacks, mitigate them when they are already happening, so make sure that they are not as harmful as they could be, and recover from them when it's already too late. So what we can do when we want to prevent cybersecurity attacks from a top-down approach, we can put regulations and standards in place that, for example, tell the workforce to implement update and access management. And update management means that when new software versions are made available, that these updates are actually installed because these often resolve security issues. And because these security issues are known not only to the vendor, software vendor, but also to security experts and hackers, it is important to install them because they can otherwise potentially be misused. And also access management is important to make sure that only those people who should have access to a certain part of the energy system have access and others are left outside the door. When we want to mitigate cybersecurity attacks, these standards and regulations can, for example, require the workforce to implement intrusion detection systems. And an intrusion detection system is a system that looks for anomalies. So when, for example, a lot of traffic is measured from a certain computer, a lot more than is usually observed, then this computer can, for example, be blocked. Also, data loss prevention techniques are important because when, for example, a virus is successfully installed on a computer, then we want to, of course, limit the impact this virus has. For example, by limiting the information that can be sent back to the attackers or preventing it to spread further within the energy system. We can also do something from the standards and regulation point of view to make sure that recovery from successful attacks are easier. And here a business continuity management system can be put into place, which means that guidelines of what needs to be done when a certain incident happens, what needs to be performed to make sure that the energy system is restored as soon as possible and operation is back to normal as soon as possible. But as the workforce contains of people, mistakes are obviously being made. For example, even when something is specified in the standard or regulation, it is possible that it is forgotten to put into practice. Or that it is put into practice, but it's done inconsistently. Or that standards and regulations are violated. If these mistakes happen, then this is likely to cause security issues, which can be misused by attackers. That is why we not only need the top-down approach, but also the bottom-up approach, so that when these mistakes happen, we can learn from it. So when we apply the bottom-up approach and we want to prevent cybersecurity attacks, we can, for example, do a code analysis. And a code analysis means that we look at the program code from a website or a computer program, for example, and test whether the code is properly coded so that cybersecurity issues are not possible. And if an issue is found, that these are marked so that the coders can improve this issue before these vulnerabilities are actually misused. Or penetration tests can, for example, be used. And a penetration test is a test in which a cybersecurity expert looks at, for example, a website and looks for many different types of security issues. And when he or she finds something, writes it down in a report to communicate this back so that these issues can be resolved before the bad guys come along and, for example, steal data. And when we want to mitigate cybersecurity attacks on a technical level, we can, for example, implement a security operation center. And a security operation center is a team of security professionals who continuously monitor an organization's infrastructure to see what is going on. And when they notice that a cybersecurity attack is happening, that they can address this immediately, as quickly as possible, to resume normal operation and limit the negative effects of this cyber attack. And when we want to recover from successful cybersecurity attacks, we can, for example, apply digital forensics, which means that we look for proof of what happened so that we learn how it was possible that this cybersecurity attack was successful, so that on the one hand we can fix this. For example, when there was a missed update, a known security issue that was being misused, we can install updates and we can learn it to avoid future cyber attacks. So both in the same place and in other parts of the energy system. And we, of course, need to, for example, do source elimination, which means that the, for example, infected computer with a virus, that it's put in quarantine, that it's cleaned, and that we make sure that we can resume normal operation as soon as possible. And as I said, humans are involved, they make errors. Because people, for example, have certain coding habits. And these coding habits are reflected in certain security issues that are introduced into the code. Or they have a limited view and only look, for example, for a certain type of attack and forget other types of attacks. Or they have a limited scope, that they only look at part of the energy system and forget to take the wider or the broader overview of the energy system in mind. Or they have false assumptions and assume that something is done properly, but it's not, and which causes security issues. Or they, for example, have false trust in third parties who provide additional software, assuming that this is safe and security issues are being resolved, but maybe that's not the case. And because these errors happen, we again need these standards and regulations to prevent these errors in the work floors as much as possible. And that is why we need this combined approach, top-down and bottom-up. And as you are involved at the management level, at the policy level, there are certain things that you can do to improve the cyber resiliency of the energy system. For example, on a regulatory level, it is possible to enforce implementing these standards and regulations that address cybersecurity and improve cybersecurity. On a financial level, it is, for example, possible to offer tax incentives or funding to improve investments or increase investments in cybersecurity, resolving and preventing cybersecurity issues. Or engaging in structural measures, for example, in setting up a national cybersecurity strategy, or collaborating with other countries to learn from each other, and making sure that responsibilities of preventing, mitigating, and recovering from cybersecurity incidents is allocated appropriately. It is also possible to require, for example, companies to report on their cybersecurity activities and incidents, to inspire them to engage in these bottom-up activities, like code analysis, penetration testing, and so on. And it is, of course, also very helpful to raise awareness by first being a good example and, for example, setting up training programs. Which then also comes back to what Sylvain says, that this literacy, digital literacy, is an issue. This can be improved with appropriate training programs. When you would like to know more about these key considerations and solution, as Sylvain also already said, you can read more in the paper, the official document that we published on this topic. And of course, feel free to reach out either to me or to my wonderful co-authors if you have any questions. Thank you, and I would like to give back to Sylvain.